In the glass-walled conference room of Pinnacle Strategic Solutions Chicago headquarters, a quiet account manager was about to face the most humiliating moment of her career. What started as a routine company restructuring meeting took a shocking turn when she came face to face with corporate betrayal at its cruelest. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell wasn't your typical pushover employee. For 5 years, she had spent her life building multi-million-dollar client relationships from the ground up, known for her methodical approach and unshakable professional integrity. When she encountered her arrogant manager Michael Bradford, delivering the crushing words, "You're easily replaceable, Sarah," she had no idea she was walking into the catalyst that would transform her life forever. Sarah's composed response that would lead to the systematic dismantling of everything her former boss had taken for granted. What began as a casual dismissal would become a masterclass in strategic revenge. The high-stakes world of corporate consulting would never be the same after the woman they underestimated proved that some relationships can't be replaced, they can only be stolen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Pinnacle Strategic Solutions' 32nd floor conference room, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her position in the ergonomic chair, her fingers wrapped around a coffee mug that had grown cold during the past hour of Michael Bradford's presentation. She'd arrived early, as always, reviewing her notes about the client relationship programs she'd built from the ground up over 5 years. Michael stood at the head of the table, his Armani suit impeccable, his Harvard MBA confidence radiating through every gesture. The restructuring slides behind him painted a picture of efficiency and cost reduction that made Sarah's stomach tighten. She watched the faces around the table, senior partners, department heads, colleagues who'd worked alongside her through countless late nights and client crises. Most avoided eye contact. The reality is, Michael continued, clicking to the next slide, we need to eliminate redundancies and streamline operations. The client relationship management division, while well-intentioned, represents an unnecessary layer of complexity. Sarah felt her chest constrict. 5 years of her life reduced to an unnecessary layer. She thought of the quarterly business reviews she'd instituted, the client satisfaction scores that had improved by 30% under her leadership, the relationships she'd cultivated that had resulted in contract renewals worth millions. "Michael," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "the client relationship programs have generated a documented ROI of 340% over the past 3 years. Our retention rates, Sarah." Michael's interruption carried the tone of someone addressing a child who'd spoken out of turn. "I appreciate your passion, but we need to look at the bigger picture here." The bigger picture. Sarah had heard that phrase from him countless times, usually when he was about to dismiss something he didn't understand or hadn't created himself. She glanced around the table again. Jennifer Thompson, her protégé and closest colleague, sat 2 seats down, her face pale. David Wells, the senior partner who'd hired Sarah straight from Northwestern, was studying his tablet with uncomfortable intensity. "The bigger picture," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength, "includes the fact that Hartwell Industries renewed their $50 million contract specifically because of the relationship management protocols we established. Robert Hartwell told me personally that's exactly my point." Michael's smile was sharp, predatory. "Client relationships aren't built on programs and protocols, Sarah. They're built on results. On strategic thinking. On leadership. That client's respect." The implication hit her like a physical blow. 5 years of 18-hour days, of missing family dinners to take late-night calls from anxious clients, of building something meaningful from nothing, all of it dismissed. With the casual cruelty of someone who'd never had to earn respect. "What exactly are you saying, Michael?" The question came out quieter than she'd intended, but the silence that followed amplified it. Michael's expression shifted, and for a moment, Sarah saw something almost gleeful in his eyes. "I'm saying that while your dedication is admirable, the truth is you're easily replaceable, Sarah. Anyone can manage client relationships. What we need now is strategic vision and operational efficiency." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Easily replaceable. The phrase echoed in Sarah's mind, drowning out whatever Michael said next about team restructuring and new reporting hierarchies. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, the familiar sensation of being underestimated that had followed her throughout her career, but this time it carried a different weight. This time it felt like betrayal. Jennifer's intake of breath was audible in the sudden quiet. David finally looked up from his tablet, his expression unreadable. Sarah realized that everyone was looking at her, waiting for her response, for her to accept this professional execution with grace. I see, she said finally, her voice carrying a calm that surprised even her. And my team will be reassigned or repositioned as needed. The client relationship functions will be distributed among existing account managers. Michael was already moving to the next slide, dismissing her as if she'd already left the building. Sarah nodded slowly, methodically gathering her papers and files. The meeting continued around her: budget allocations, timeline discussions, implementation schedules, but she heard none of it. Her mind was calculating, processing, planning with the strategic thinking Michael claimed she lacked. When the meeting finally ended, Sarah remained seated as colleagues filed out, some offering apologetic glances, others avoiding her entirely. Jennifer lingered by the door, clearly wanting to speak, but Sarah gave her a small shake of the head. Not here. Not now. Michael was packing his laptop when Sarah approached him. The conference room had emptied except for them, and the morning light had shifted, casting new shadows across the table where her career had just been dismantled. I need to understand something, she said, her voice level. The Hartwell renewal I delivered last month, the one that exceeded projections by 20%, was that strategically valuable? Michael didn't look up from his bag. Of course it was valuable, Sarah. That's not the point. What about the crisis management I handled with Peterson Manufacturing? When their CEO was threatening to pull their contract because of the supply chain issues? You did your job. His tone suggested the conversation was over. My job. Sarah repeated the words, tasting their bitterness. The job I've done for 5 years. The job that generated $47 million in retained business. Last year alone. That job. Michael finally looked at her, and she saw something in his expression that made everything click into place. Fear. Insecurity. The look of someone who'd never built anything from scratch, who'd never earned the kind of loyalty she commanded from clients like Robert Hartwell. Sarah, I know this is difficult, but you need to understand that this isn't personal. It's business. The company is evolving, and we need people who can evolve with it. The condescension in his voice was the final spark. Sarah felt something. Fundamental shift inside her, like a foundation settling after years of supporting weight it was never meant to bear. The quiet, accommodating team player who'd built her career on competence in relationships was still there, but alongside her now stood someone else, someone who'd been forged in this moment of casual cruelty. You're right, Michael, she said, her smile as sharp as his had been earlier. It is business. She walked toward the door, her steps measured and purposeful. At the threshold, she turned back. Just so we're clear, when you said anyone can manage client relationships, did that include maintaining the personal rapport I've built with Robert Hartwell over 3 years? The kind of rapport that led to him calling me directly at home last weekend to discuss expansion opportunities? Michael's face went pale. Sarah, you're upset. Don't do anything rash. Rash? Sarah's laugh was soft, dangerous. Michael, I've never done anything rash in my life. Everything I do is carefully considered. Methodically planned. That's what makes me good at my job. She stepped into the hallway, leaving Michael standing alone in the conference room. The elevator was waiting, as if the building itself was facilitating her exit. As the doors closed, Sarah caught her reflection in the polished steel, composed, professional, unchanged on the surface. But beneath that surface, everything had shifted. The loyal employee was gone, replaced by someone who understood that respect wasn't given, it was taken. And if Michael Bradford thought she was easily replaceable, he was about to learn exactly how wrong one person could be. The elevator descended toward the parking garage, carrying Sarah away from the life she'd built and toward something else. Entirely. Something that would test every assumption Michael had made about her capabilities, her worth, and her willingness to fight for what she'd earned. By the time the doors opened, Sarah Mitchell had made her decision. She was done being underestimated. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage's fluorescent-lit expanse, but Sarah didn't immediately move toward her car. She stood there, briefcase in hand, letting the finality of what had just happened settle over her like dust after an explosion. The underground garage felt appropriate, buried, hidden, removed from the gleaming corporate facade 32 floors above. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Are you okay? Can we talk? Sarah typed back quickly, not here. Later. She needed space to think, to process what Michael's casual dismissal really meant for everything she'd built. The drive to her Lincoln Park apartment passed in a blur of Chicago traffic and autumn leaves. Sarah had chosen the neighborhood specifically for its proximity to Pinnacle, but now that proximity felt like a daily reminder of professional failure. She parked in her assigned spot and took the elevator to the 15th floor, her movements automatic. Inside her apartment, Sarah dropped her briefcase by the door and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The water stretched endlessly, indifferent to corporate politics and wounded pride. She'd stood at the same window 5 years ago, fresh from Northwestern's MBA program, clutching her offer letter from Pinnacle and dreaming of the career she'd build. That woman felt like a stranger now. Sarah moved to her home office, a converted bedroom where she kept her personal files and the laptop she used for evening work. The room was organized with the same methodical precision she brought to everything: client files arranged by importance, industry publications stacked by date, her MBA diploma hanging above the desk like a talisman. She pulled out her personal client database, a detailed record she'd maintained separately from Pinnacle's official files. Each entry contained more than contract details and billing information. Sarah had documented personal preferences, family situations, communication styles, the small details that transformed business relationships into genuine connections. Robert Hartwell's file was the thickest. 3 years of notes revealed a complex portrait: a third-generation business owner who'd transformed his grandfather's small manufacturing operation into a national powerhouse through strategic partnerships and unwavering quality standards. Sarah had documented his preference for morning meetings, his tendency to make decisions quickly once he trusted someone, his pride in maintaining his workforce during economic downturns. More importantly, she'd noted his growing frustration with what he called corporate speak and his appreciation for straight talk. In their last conversation, he'd mentioned his disappointment with some of Pinnacle's junior consultants who seemed more interested in impressing him with buzzwords than understanding his business. Sarah leaned back in her chair, staring at the notes she'd accumulated. Michael called her easily replaceable, but could anyone else tell you that Robert Hartwell kept a photo of his late father on his desk and always paused before making major decisions? Could they navigate his direct communication style or understand why he valued loyalty above almost everything else? Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed her father's number. "Hi, Dad." "Sarah, sweetheart. How was your day?" Thomas Mitchell's voice carried the warmth of someone who'd spent 30 years building relationships with his own clients. Even in retirement, he maintained the genuine interest in others that had made his accounting firm successful. Sarah found herself unable to speak for a moment. The day's events crashed over her again: Michael's dismissive tone, the looks of uncomfortable colleagues, the casual destruction of everything she'd worked for. "Sarah? You there?" "Dad, She took a breath, steadying herself. "I had a difficult day at work. Want to talk about it?" Sarah found herself describing the restructuring meeting, Michael's comments, the systematic dismantling of her programs. Her father listened without interruption, a skill he'd honed through decades of helping clients navigate business challenges. "Let me ask you something," Thomas said when she finished. "Do you believe what he said? That you're easily replaceable?" The question cut straight to the heart of her pain. "I don't know anymore, Dad. Maybe I've been fooling myself about my value." Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. Her father's voice carried the authority of someone who'd raised her to believe in herself. "I've watched you work since you were 16, filing papers in my office. You've never fooled yourself about anything. You see clearly, you work harder than anyone, and you treat people with respect. That's not replaceable, that's rare." Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time since the meeting. But what if he's right? What if anyone can do what I do? Can anyone else make Robert Hartwell call you at home on weekends? The question was simple, but it landed with the force of revelation. Sarah thought about the relationships she'd built, the trust she'd earned, the results she'd delivered. Michael could eliminate her position, but he couldn't transfer the respect she'd earned from clients who valued authenticity over corporate polish. "No," she said quietly. "They can't." "That's right. And you know what else? If this Michael character can't see your value, he's not the kind of leader you want to work for anyway." After hanging up, Sarah returned to her client files with renewed purpose. She began documenting not just what she knew about each client, but what they'd specifically told her about their satisfaction with Pinnacle services. The picture that emerged was troubling. Several clients had expressed concerns about the company's direction, its increasing focus on standardized solutions over customized service. Most telling were Robert Hartwell's recent comments about wanting to work with consultants who understood his business personally, not just strategically. He praised Sarah's approach while subtly criticizing what he called the corporate consulting machine. As midnight approached, Sarah sat surrounded by 5 years of careful documentation. Michael saw her as easily replaceable, but the evidence spread across her desk told a different story. She wasn't just an account manager, she was a bridge between Pinnacle and its most valuable clients, built on relationships that transcended corporate structures. The question wasn't whether she was replaceable. The question was whether those relationships belonged to her or to Pinnacle. And as Sarah reviewed client after client who'd specifically requested to work with her, who'd trusted her with sensitive business information, who'd invited her to family celebrations and company milestones, she began to see a path forward. Michael Bradford had made a critical error. He'd assumed that dismissing her would eliminate her value to the company. Instead, he'd freed her to explore exactly how much of that value was tied to her personally. Sarah closed the last file and looked out at Lake Michigan, now dark under the night sky. Somewhere in the city, Michael was probably sleeping peacefully, confident in his restructuring decisions. He had no idea that his easily replaceable employee was about to test just how wrong one assumption could be. The foundation of her plan began forming in her mind, built on the same methodical approach that had made her successful at Pinnacle. She would need to be careful, strategic, and patient. But for the first time since the meeting ended, Sarah felt something besides anger and hurt. She felt possibility. Sarah arrived at Pinnacle's offices at 6:30 the next morning, 2 hours before Michael typically appeared. The building's lobby was nearly empty except for security guards and cleaning staff, the usual early morning quiet that she'd always found productive. Today, that quiet felt strategic. She settled into her office, though she wondered how long it would remain hers, and pulled out her personal phone. The conversation with her father had crystallized something important. She needed to understand exactly where she stood with her clients, particularly Robert Hartwell. At 7:15, she dialed Hartwell Industries' main number. Robert was notorious for arriving early, a habit he'd inherited from his father along with the business itself. Hartwell Industries, this is Robert. His direct approach to answering phones was one of the details Sarah had documented, part of his old-school, hands-on management style that had served him well in building the company. Good morning, Robert. It's Sarah Mitchell from Pinnacle. I hope I'm not calling too early. Sarah, not at all. You know I'm always here by 7. What can I do for you? Sarah had rehearsed this conversation during her restless night, but hearing Robert's familiar voice made her realize how much was riding on the next few minutes. I wanted to touch base about the Q4 implementation timeline we discussed last week. Are you still comfortable with the November 15th target date? Actually, I'm glad you called. I've been thinking about that timeline, and I have some concerns about Pinnacle's capacity to deliver what we discussed. Sarah's pulse quickened. What kind of concerns? Well, to be frank, I've noticed some changes in how your company operates lately. More bureaucracy, less personal attention. Last month's quarterly review felt like a presentation to a board of directors rather than a conversation between partners. The quarterly review had been managed by Michael, one of his attempts to demonstrate his strategic oversight of the account. Sarah remembered Robert's polite but distant demeanor during that meeting, so different from their usual collaborative discussions. Robert, can you be more specific about what you observed? Your colleague, Bradford, I think, seemed more interested in impressing me with corporate strategy than understanding our actual needs. He kept referring to synergistic solutions and value-added frameworks. Sarah, we make metal components for manufacturing equipment. We need practical solutions, not business school buzzwords. Sarah felt a mix of vindication and concern. Michael's approach was exactly what she'd feared, substance over style replaced by style over substance. I understand your frustration, Robert. The truth is, there have been some organizational changes at Pinnacle that might affect how we serve your account going forward. What kind of changes? Sarah chose her words carefully, staying professional while testing Robert's loyalty to the relationship versus the company. Leadership changes in client management. There's been a shift toward more standardized service delivery across all accounts. The silence on the other end stretched long enough for Sarah to wonder if the call had dropped. Sarah, let me ask you something directly. Are you still going to be my primary contact? The question hit harder than she'd expected. In 3 years of working together, Robert had never asked about corporate structures or reporting relationships. He'd simply assumed that she would continue to be available, that their working relationship transcended whatever happened in Pinnacle's internal politics. That's part of what's being restructured, Robert. Another pause. I see. And this Bradford character, he's going to take over the account? That's the current plan. Without consulting the client about whether we're comfortable with that transition? Sarah hadn't considered that angle. In all of Michael's restructuring presentations, client preferences had never been mentioned. The assumption seemed to be that clients would accept whatever changes Pinnacle implemented. Robert, what would you need to see to feel confident about any transition? Honestly? I'd need to see competence and reliability. Those aren't negotiable. Sarah, you've never missed a deadline, never overpromised, never treated me like just another account number. Can your colleagues say the same? Sarah stopped herself. She was walking a fine line between professional discretion and honest assessment. Never mind, don't answer that. It's not fair to put you in that position. But Sarah, I want you to know that my relationship is with you, not just with Pinnacle. If that changes, I'll need to reconsider our arrangements. Before Sarah could respond, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her office. Through the glass partition, she saw Jennifer Thompson approaching, coffee in hand and concern written across her face. Robert, I appreciate your candor more than you know. Can we continue this conversation soon? I want to make sure we address all your concerns. Of course. Call me anytime, Sarah. You know that. After hanging up, Sarah gestured for Jennifer to come in. Her younger colleague closed the door behind her and settled into the chair across from Sarah's desk. You look like you didn't sleep, Jennifer observed. I didn't. Did you? Jennifer shook her head. I kept thinking about yesterday's meeting. Sarah, what Michael said was completely out of line. Was it? Maybe he's right. Maybe anyone can manage client relationships. Stop. Jennifer's voice carried an edge Sarah rarely heard from her. I've watched you work for 2 years. I've seen how clients respond to you versus how they respond to other account managers. You're not replaceable, Sarah. You're the best at what you do. Then why do I feel like I've been sleepwalking through my career? Jennifer leaned forward. Because you've been so focused on doing excellent work that you haven't been focused on protecting yourself politically. That's not a flaw, Sarah, that's integrity. But it also makes you vulnerable to people like Michael who play politics better than they serve clients. Speaking of Michael, what's the office gossip about yesterday? Jennifer glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. People are nervous. The restructuring isn't just about your department, there are rumors about more changes coming. Cost-cutting measures. Some people think Michael is positioning himself for a promotion by demonstrating his ability to streamline operations. At whose expense? Anyone who doesn't fit his vision of efficiency. Sarah, there's something else. I heard Amanda mention that Michael has been asking questions about your client relationships. Specifically about which clients request you personally versus accepting whoever's assigned to their account. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Michael was doing exactly what she would do in his position, assessing vulnerabilities and planning accordingly. The difference was that she would never use that information to hurt someone. Jennifer, can I ask you something? If I were to leave Pinnacle, what do you think would happen to the clients I work with? Honestly? I think some would follow you. Robert Hartwell, definitely. Peterson Manufacturing, probably. The others, it would depend on how well Michael manages the transition. And if he doesn't manage it well? Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Then Pinnacle loses some very valuable accounts. And you'd be in a position to serve those clients better than they're currently being served. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from non-compete clauses to client contract terms. By the time Jennifer left, Sarah had a clearer picture of both the risks and opportunities ahead. She spent the rest of the morning reviewing client files and industry regulations, building a comprehensive understanding of what would be legally and ethically possible if she decided to leave Pinnacle. The picture that emerged was encouraging. Most of her client relationships predated current non-compete terms, and several contracts contained clauses allowing clients to follow their preferred consultants to new firms. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. More importantly, Sarah realized that her value wasn't just in the relationships she'd built, but in the approach she'd developed to client service. Michael could eliminate her position, but he couldn't replicate her methodology or her genuine care for client success. As noon approached, Sarah made her decision. She would continue testing the waters, but more systematically. Robert Hartwell's comments had revealed a dissatisfaction with Pinnacle's direction that went beyond simple preference. If other clients felt the same way, then Michael's restructuring might have created an opportunity he never intended. Sarah picked up her phone and began scrolling through her client contacts. It was time to have some very careful conversations about satisfaction, expectations, and the future of consulting relationships. Michael Bradford thought he was eliminating redundancy. Instead, he might have just created his own competition. Sarah spent her lunch hour at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Pinnacle's offices, laptop open, researching business incorporation requirements for Illinois. The familiar rhythm of typing and clicking provided a strange comfort as she navigated through state websites and legal databases, each piece of information another building block in what was becoming a concrete plan. The process was more straightforward than she'd expected. Mitchell Strategic Consulting, the name had come to her during her sleepless night, could be established within a week. The paperwork was manageable, the initial capital requirements modest. What mattered more was the strategic foundation, client relationships, industry knowledge, and the methodical approach that had made her successful at Pinnacle. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert Hartwell. "Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation this morning. Could we schedule a call this afternoon? I have some ideas I'd like to discuss." Sarah stared at the message, recognizing the pivot point it represented. Robert wasn't just expressing dissatisfaction with Pinnacle's direction, he was reaching out directly to her, personally. The relationship Michael had dismissed as easily replaceable was actively choosing her over the corporate structure. She typed back, "Of course. I'm available after 3 p.m. What works for you?" The response came immediately, 3:30. "I'll call your direct line." Back at the office, Sarah found herself observing everything differently. The polished conference rooms, the expensive artwork, the gleaming technology, all of it suddenly felt like overhead rather than assets. She thought about her father's accounting firm, run from a modest office suite with 2 employees and 30 years of client loyalty. Success didn't require corner offices and corporate hierarchy. At 2:45, Sarah was reviewing her notes on Hartwell Industries when Michael appeared in her doorway. He looked different somehow, less confident than usual, his expression guarded. "Sarah, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to discuss yesterday's restructuring announcement." "Of course." She gestured to the chair across from her desk, the same chair where Jennifer had sat that morning, where countless clients had shared their business challenges over the years. Michael settled himself, adjusting his tie in a gesture Sarah had learned to recognize as nervousness. "I want to make sure you understand that the changes we're implementing aren't a reflection of your performance. You've done good work here. Good work. Not excellent work, not indispensable work. Good work, the kind of faint praise that confirmed every concern she'd developed about Michael's perception of her value. I appreciate that, Michael. Can you help me understand how the client relationships I've built will be managed going forward? That's actually what I wanted to discuss. I've been reviewing your client files, and I'm impressed by the depth of relationships you've established. The transition will need to be handled carefully." Sarah felt a spark of something, anger, perhaps, or just clarity. The transition? Well, yes. These relationships are valuable company assets. We need to ensure continuity of service while implementing more efficient management structures. Company assets. The phrase landed like a slap. 5 years of 18-hour days, of learning client preferences and industry details, of building trust through consistent delivery, all of it reduced to company assets to be transferred like equipment or intellectual property. "Michael, these relationships were built on personal trust and consistent service. How do you transfer that?" His expression shifted slightly, revealing the calculation behind his corporate speak. "Sarah, I know this is emotional for you, but we need to think strategically. Client relationships are ultimately about results. If we continue delivering results, the relationships will maintain themselves. And if the clients don't agree with that assessment?" Michael's pause was telling. "What do you mean? What if clients have preferences about who manages their accounts? What if they've specifically requested to work with me rather than with Pinnacle generally?" "Sarah, you're overthinking this. Clients want results, not personalities. They'll adapt to new account management." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but Sarah had heard enough. Michael's entire approach was built on assumptions that directly contradicted everything she knew about her clients. He believed that business relationships were transactional, that results mattered more than trust, that clients would accept whatever changes Pinnacle implemented. He was about to learn how wrong those assumptions could be. At 3:30 exactly, her phone rang. "Sarah, it's Robert. I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to follow up on our conversation from this morning." "Not at all, Robert. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about what you said regarding organizational changes at Pinnacle. I'll be direct, I'm not comfortable with the direction your company seems to be heading. The increased bureaucracy, the standardized approaches, the focus on efficiency over relationship." Sarah chose her words carefully. "What would you need to see to feel confident about the consulting relationship going forward?" "Honestly? I need to see the same level of personal attention and customized service that you've provided for the past 3 years. I don't want to work with someone who sees Hartwell Industries as just another account to manage efficiently." "Robert, can I ask you something? If I were to start my own consulting practice, one focused specifically on the kind of personalized service you value, would that be something you'd consider?" The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Sarah could hear papers rustling in the background, the sound of Robert processing an idea he hadn't expected. "You're thinking about leaving Pinnacle?" "I'm exploring options. Yesterday's restructuring Made it clear that my approach to client relationships doesn't align with the company's new direction. Your approach is exactly what I value most about working with Pinnacle. Sarah, if you started your own firm, yes, I'd absolutely consider it. In fact, I'd probably prefer it. The question is whether you'd be able to provide the same level of service without Pinnacle's resources. Sarah had been preparing for exactly this question. Robert, what resources does Pinnacle provide that directly impact your satisfaction with our consulting relationship? Another pause. You know what? When I think about it, everything I value comes from you personally. Your knowledge of our business, your responsiveness, your strategic thinking. The Pinnacle brand name is nice, but it's not what makes the relationship successful. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from service expectations to transition logistics. By the time they hung up, Sarah had something she'd never expected, a potential anchor client for Mitchell Strategic Consulting. She spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a business plan, outlining service offerings, and researching office space options. The plan that emerged was lean, focused, and built around everything Michael had dismissed as easily replaceable: personal relationships, customized service, and genuine care for client success. As the day wound down, Sarah realized she'd crossed a threshold. This morning, leaving Pinnacle had been a possibility. Now it felt like inevitability. Michael's restructuring had forced her to see herself clearly for the first time in years, not as a corporate employee, but as an entrepreneur who'd been building her business within someone else's company. The only question was timing. Sarah needed to be strategic about her departure, careful about legal obligations, and methodical about client transitions. She'd built her career on substance over flash, and her next move would reflect that same approach. Michael Bradford thought he was eliminating redundancy. Instead, he was about to discover that the most valuable assets in consulting weren't systems or processes, they were relationships built on trust, delivered through competence, and maintained through genuine care. And those assets were walking out the door with Sarah Mitchell. Sarah arrived at work the following Monday with a sealed envelope in her briefcase and a clarity of purpose that felt almost physical. The weekend had been spent in careful preparation: business registration filed, initial office space identified, legal consultation completed. Her resignation letter was concise, professional, and strategically timed. She bypassed Michael's office entirely, walking directly to David Wells' corner suite on the 40th floor. David's assistant, Margaret, looked up with surprise as Sarah approached. Sarah, good morning. Do you have an appointment with Mr. Wells? No, but I need to speak with him about an urgent matter. Is he available? Margaret glanced at her calendar. He has 15 minutes before his 9 o'clock. Let me check. Moments later, Sarah found herself seated across from David Wells in his expansive office overlooking Michigan Avenue. David was a man who'd built Pinnacle from a two-person consulting firm into a regional powerhouse, and his success showed in every detail of his surroundings: awards, client photos, testimonials from satisfied customers. Sarah, what can I do for you? David's tone was warm but businesslike, the approach of someone who valued efficiency. Sarah placed the envelope on his desk. David, I'm submitting my resignation from Pinnacle Strategic Solutions. My last day will be November 15th, providing 2 weeks' notice as required by my employment agreement. David's expression shifted from pleasant attention to sharp focus. He opened the envelope, scanning the formal letter quickly before setting it aside. Yes. And Sarah, whatever you're planning, I think you're doing the right thing. The afternoon passed quickly as Sarah began preparing her proposal for Hartwell Industries. The exercise forced her to think through every aspect of service delivery, from project management to quality assurance. Without Pinnacle's resources, she would need to be more efficient, more focused, more personally invested in every client outcome. Surprisingly, the constraints felt liberating rather than limiting. Instead of adapting client needs to corporate processes, she could design processes specifically around client requirements. Instead of managing multiple stakeholders within Pinnacle, she could focus entirely on managing client relationships and delivering results. At 5 o'clock, Sarah's office phone rang. The caller ID showed David Wells' extension. Sarah, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to discuss your transition timeline. Of course, David. I've been thinking about our conversation this morning, and I'm concerned about the potential impact on client relationships. Specifically, I'm wondering if we might be able to work out some kind of consulting arrangement that would allow you to maintain your client relationships while still providing Pinnacle with continuity. The proposal was interesting but problematic. Sarah could see the appeal from David's perspective, maintaining client satisfaction while minimizing competitive threats. From her perspective, however, it would compromise the independence that Made Mitchell Strategic valuable to clients like Robert Hartwell. David, I appreciate the creative thinking, but I don't think that kind of arrangement would serve anyone's interests effectively. Clients need clarity about who they're working with and what they can expect from the relationship. I understand that, Sarah. But losing key client relationships isn't just about revenue, it's about market reputation. If clients follow you to Mitchell Strategic, it raises questions about Pinnacle's ability to maintain the relationships we've built. The conversation revealed David's growing understanding of the situation's implications. Sarah's departure wasn't just a personnel change, it was a test of whether Pinnacle's corporate structure could compete with personalized service delivery. David, I want to be completely transparent with you. I've had preliminary conversations with some clients about the possibility of working with Mitchell Strategic. Those conversations have been very encouraging. How encouraging? Sarah paused, considering how much information to share. Encouraging enough that I'm confident Mitchell Strategic will be viable from day one. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When David spoke again, his tone was more serious. Sarah, I need to ask you directly, are you planning to solicit Pinnacle clients for your new business? David, I'm planning to offer consulting services to manufacturing and industrial companies. Some of those companies currently work with Pinnacle. If they choose to work with Mitchell Strategic instead, that will be their decision based on their assessment of which option better serves their needs. That's not really an answer to my question. It's the only answer I can give you, David. I'm committed to operating ethically and legally, but I'm also committed to building a successful consulting practice. Those two commitments aren't mutually exclusive, but they do create some complex dynamics. After hanging up, Sarah sat quietly in her office, processing the day's events. Robert Hartwell's enthusiasm had validated her market assessment, but David's concerns had highlighted the competitive tensions that would emerge from her departure. She was no longer just leaving Pinnacle, she was potentially destabilizing the client relationships that justified Michael's restructuring strategy. Her computer chimed with an email from Michael. Sarah, I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. We have several urgent matters to discuss regarding your resignation and its potential impact on client relationships. Sarah looked at the message, recognizing the shift in tone from Michael's earlier communications. The easily replaceable employee was becoming a competitive threat, and Michael was beginning to understand the implications of his casual dismissal. She gathered her files, locked her computer, and prepared to leave Pinnacle's offices. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she had work to do, preparing a proposal that would transform Mitchell Strategic Consulting from possibility into reality. The courtship phase was ending. The real competition was about to begin. Sarah arrived at Pinnacle Tuesday morning to find Michael pacing in his office, his usual composure replaced by barely controlled agitation. Through the glass walls, she could see him speaking rapidly into his phone, gesturing with the sharp movements of someone under pressure. When he spotted her walking past his office, he ended his call abruptly and motioned for her to enter. Sarah, we need to talk. Now. She settled into the chair across from his desk, noting the scattered papers, the cold coffee, the signs of someone who'd spent a sleepless night managing a crisis. Michael, what can I do for you? You can explain to me why Robert Hartwell called David Wells yesterday afternoon asking about the terms of your resignation and whether Pinnacle would honor existing client relationships during your transition. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though internally she felt a mix of surprise and concern. Robert's call to David suggested he was moving more quickly than she'd anticipated, and that Michael was already scrambling to control the situation. I'm not sure I understand the question, Michael. Don't play games with me, Sarah. You met with Hartwell yesterday. You discussed your new consulting business. You solicited him as a client while you're still employed by Pinnacle. Michael's voice rose with each accusation, his corporate polish cracking under stress. Michael, I had lunch with a client to discuss ongoing projects and future consulting needs. That's part of my job responsibilities during the transition period. Your job responsibilities don't include undermining Pinnacle's client relationships to benefit your own business interests. Sarah recognized the conversation's trajectory. Michael was building a case for breach of contract or violation of non-compete terms. She'd prepared for this possibility, but experiencing it felt different than anticipating it. Michael, I've been careful to operate within all legal and ethical boundaries. I haven't violated any terms of my employment agreement. We'll see about that. Michael opened his laptop and began reading from what appeared to be a prepared statement. As of this morning, you're restricted from direct client contact unless specifically authorized by senior management. All client communications will be routed through me personally. The restriction was legally questionable but practically devastating. Without client contact, Sarah couldn't manage existing projects or facilitate transition discussions. Michael was essentially cutting her off from the relationships that defined her value to both Pinnacle and her future clients. Michael, that restriction will negatively impact current projects and client satisfaction. The Hartwell Q4 implementation requires weekly status meetings, and the Peterson manufacturing audit is scheduled for completion next week. Those projects will be reassigned to other team members. You'll provide detailed transition documentation to ensure continuity. Sarah felt a familiar surge of anger, but this time it was accompanied by strategic clarity. Michael's restrictions weren't just punitive, they were tactically foolish. By cutting her off from clients, he was eliminating any possibility of smooth transition and virtually guaranteeing client dissatisfaction. Michael, I want to make sure I understand the implications of what you're proposing. You're removing me from active client management 2 weeks before my departure, during critical project phases, without providing clients advance notice of the changes? I'm protecting Pinnacle's business interests. Are you? Because what you're actually doing is creating service disruptions that will damage client relationships and validate every concern clients have expressed about Pinnacle's increasing bureaucracy. Michael's expression shifted, revealing a flash of uncertainty. He was reacting emotionally rather than strategically, and Sarah's professional response was highlighting the flaws in his approach. Sarah, let me be very clear about something. I know what you're trying to do, and I won't let you destroy what we've built here. If you think you can waltz out of here with our clients and start your own competing business, you're badly mistaken. Michael, I'm trying to complete my remaining projects professionally and transition my responsibilities in a way that serves everyone's interests. If you interpret that as destructive, perhaps you should examine your own assumptions about client loyalty and what creates lasting business relationships. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, growing increasingly tense as Michael outlined additional restrictions and Sarah responded with professional calm that seemed to agitate him further. Finally, he dismissed her with instructions to prepare detailed transition documentation for all her accounts. Back in her office, Sarah found Jennifer waiting with coffee and barely concealed concern. I heard raised voices, Jennifer said, closing the door behind her. How bad was it? Michael's panicking. He's implemented restrictions that will damage client relationships while trying to prevent me from maintaining them. It's going to backfire spectacularly. What kind of restrictions? Sarah outlined Michael's new policies, watching Jennifer's expression grow increasingly concerned. Sarah, he can't just cut you off from clients without explanation. They'll be furious. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Jennifer stared at her. You're counting on client dissatisfaction? I'm counting on clients recognizing the difference between corporate politics and professional service. Michael's restrictions will demonstrate everything that's wrong with Pinnacle's new direction. As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's office phone rang. The caller ID showed Hartwell Industries. Sarah looked at the phone, then at Jennifer. Michael said all client communications have to go through him. Are you going to follow that restriction? Sarah picked up the phone. Good morning, Robert. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to follow up on yesterday's conversation. I've reviewed the materials you mentioned, and I'm ready to move forward with the Mitchell strategic proposal. Robert, I appreciate your confidence, but I need to let you know that there have been some changes at Pinnacle regarding client communication during my transition period. What kind of changes? Sarah chose her words carefully, staying factual while letting Robert draw his own conclusions. Management has decided that all client communications should be routed through Michael Bradford to ensure consistency. During the transition, the silence on the other end was telling. When Robert spoke again, his tone was sharp. Are you telling me that Pinnacle is preventing you from communicating with clients you've worked with for 3 years? I'm telling you that there are new protocols in place. Without consulting the clients about whether we're comfortable with those protocols? That's correct. Robert's response was immediate and decisive. Sarah, I'm going to call David Wells directly and express my concerns about these new protocols. Hartwell Industries has specific expectations regarding communication and service delivery, and those expectations don't include having our account management decisions made unilaterally by Pinnacle. After hanging up, Sarah sat quietly for a moment, processing what had just happened. She'd followed Michael's restrictions while also ensuring that Robert understood their implications. The result was exactly what she'd predicted. Client dissatisfaction that would ultimately hurt Pinnacle more than her. Her phone rang again within minutes. This time it was David Wells. Sarah, I just received a very concerned call from Robert Hartwell about communication restrictions. Can you help me understand what's happening? David, Michael has implemented new protocols for client communication during my transition. All contact is supposed to be routed through him personally. That seems problematic. Clients have existing relationships and expectations. Disrupting those relationships could create more problems than it solves. I agree, but Michael feels it's necessary to protect Pinnacle's interests. What do you think would happen if we lifted those restrictions? Sarah considered the question carefully. I think clients would appreciate the ability to communicate directly with the person managing their projects. I also think they would be more likely to feel positive about their overall experience with Pinnacle during this transition. And if we don't lift the restrictions? I think clients will be frustrated by the bureaucracy and may question whether Pinnacle's current direction aligns with their service expectations. David was quiet for a moment. Sarah, I'm going to override Michael's restrictions. I want you to communicate with clients as needed to ensure smooth project transitions. But I also want you to be very careful about how you handle those communications. I understand, David. I'll be completely professional. After hanging up, Jennifer looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. You just engineered a situation where Michael's attempts to restrict you actually strengthened your position with both clients and senior management. I didn't engineer anything, Jennifer. I just responded professionally to an unprofessional situation. Michael created the problem, I just made sure the right people understood its implications. The afternoon brought 3 more client calls, each following a similar pattern. My vision is built around 3 core principles, she began. First, genuine partnership rather than vendor relationships. I want to understand my clients' businesses so thoroughly that I can anticipate needs before they become problems. Second, customized solutions rather than standardized approaches. Every business has unique challenges that require unique strategies. Third, personal accountability. When you work with Mitchell Strategic, you work with me directly, not with a team of junior consultants who rotate based on availability. Robert nodded as she spoke, his expression thoughtful. Those principles sound familiar. They describe exactly what I've valued about working with you at Pinnacle. That's intentional, Robert. What I'm proposing is the same quality of service, but without the corporate constraints that sometimes compromise effectiveness. Such as? Sarah chose her words carefully, staying professional while being honest about the limitations she'd faced at Pinnacle. Billing structures that prioritize hours over results. Standardized processes that don't account for client preferences. Management layers that slow decision-making and increase costs. At Mitchell Strategic, I can focus entirely on what matters most, delivering results that justify the investment. Robert leaned forward slightly, his interest clearly engaged. Let's talk specifics. The Q4 implementation we discussed, how would you handle that differently as an independent consultant versus through Pinnacle? The question was exactly what Sarah had hoped for. Under the current Pinnacle structure, that project would involve 3 junior consultants, weekly status meetings, and a standardized project management framework that adds approximately 30% to the timeline. Working independently, I could complete the implementation in half the time with more personalized attention to your specific requirements. And cost? 20% less than Pinnacle's proposal, with twice the senior level involvement. Robert was quiet for a moment, processing the numbers. Sarah knew he was calculating not just the immediate savings, but the long-term value of more efficient service delivery. Sarah, I have to ask, are you certain you can provide the same level of service without Pinnacle's resources? Research capabilities, industry databases, support staff? It was a fair question, one that went to the heart of whether independent consulting could match corporate capabilities. Robert, in 3 years of managing your account, what Pinnacle resources have directly contributed to your satisfaction with our consulting relationship? Robert considered this, his expression thoughtful. You know, when I really think about it, everything I value comes from you personally. Your industry knowledge, your understanding of our business, your responsiveness. The Pinnacle brand provides credibility, but the actual value is delivered through your individual capabilities. That's exactly right. And as an independent consultant, I can focus entirely on developing those capabilities rather than managing corporate politics and administrative requirements. Their conversation continued through lunch, covering everything from service delivery models to communication preferences. Robert asked detailed questions about Sarah's transition timeline, her business development strategy, and her long-term vision for growth. By the time dessert arrived, Sarah sensed a shift in Robert's demeanor. He'd moved from evaluating her proposal to planning how to implement it. Sarah, I want to be direct with you. Hartwell Industries has been increasingly frustrated with some aspects of Pinnacle service delivery. The bureaucracy, the junior staff turnover, the feeling that we're just another account number rather than a valued partner. What you're proposing addresses every one of those concerns. I'm glad to hear that, Robert. But I want to make sure you understand the transition implications. Moving your consulting relationship from Pinnacle to Mitchell Strategic isn't just a vendor change, it's a strategic decision that could affect your other business relationships. Robert's expression grew serious. What do you mean? Pinnacle won't be happy about losing the Hartwell account. They may attempt to damage our professional relationship through industry contacts, competitive intelligence, or other means. You need to be prepared for that possibility. Sarah, I've been in business for 30 years. I've learned to judge people by their character and results, not by what their competitors say about them. If Pinnacle wants to retain the Hartwell account, they should focus on improving their service delivery rather than undermining their former employees. The comment was telling. Robert had clearly given thought to the competitive dynamics that would emerge from Sarah's departure from Pinnacle. There's something else, Sarah continued. Your decision to work with Mitchell Strategic will send a message to other Pinnacle clients about the value of personalized service versus corporate efficiency. You'll essentially be validating my approach over Michael Bradford's restructuring strategy. Robert smiled for the first time during the conversation. Sarah, let me tell you something about my business philosophy. I don't make decisions to send messages to anyone. I make decisions to get the best possible results for Hartwell Industries. If that validates your approach and challenges Pinnacle's strategy, so be it. As they prepared to leave, Robert reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder. I took the liberty of having our legal team review the consulting agreement Pinnacle proposed for next year. I'd like you to take a look at this and prepare a proposal for the same scope of work through Mitchell Strategic Consulting. If your proposal meets our requirements, I'm prepared to make this your first official contract. Sarah accepted the folder, feeling the weight of what it represented. The Hartwell Industries contract wasn't just her first client, it was validation that her approach to consulting had value beyond Pinnacle's corporate structure. Robert, I'm honored by your confidence. I'll review this thoroughly and have a proposal to you within the week. Take your time. Good decisions shouldn't be rushed. Robert stood, extending his hand again. Sarah, I want you to know that this decision isn't just about business efficiency. It's about working with people who understand that success comes from relationships built on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence. As Sarah watched Robert leave the restaurant, she felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility. The conversation had exceeded her best-case expectations, but it had also raised the stakes considerably. She wasn't just starting a consulting practice, she was challenging the fundamental assumptions underlying Michael's restructuring strategy. Back at Pinnacle's offices, Sarah found herself observing the familiar environment with new eyes. The impressive conference rooms, the expensive technology, the corporate artwork, all of it suddenly felt like overhead rather than assets. She thought about Robert's comments regarding bureaucracy and standardization, seeing how corporate growth had gradually separated decision-makers from the client relationships that drove success. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer. Michael's been asking questions about your meetings. He seems increasingly agitated. Be careful. Sarah typed back, thanks for the heads up. Can we talk later? Sarah, this is unexpected. Can you help me understand what's driving this decision? She'd rehearsed this conversation carefully, focusing on professional growth rather than personal conflict. I've decided to start my own consulting practice. After 5 years at Pinnacle, I'm ready for the challenge of building something from the ground up. And this decision is related to last week's restructuring? David's directness was one of the qualities that had made Pinnacle successful, but it also put Sarah in a delicate position. She needed to be honest without being accusatory. The restructuring made me realize that my career goals may not align with Pinnacle's current direction. I believe I can serve clients more effectively through an independent practice focused on personalized relationships and customized solutions. David leaned back in his chair, studying her with the attention of someone who'd built a business by understanding people and their motivations. Sarah, you're one of our most successful account managers. Your client satisfaction scores are exceptional, your retention rates are industry-leading. What can I do to keep you here? The question touched something in Sarah, a recognition of her value that had been absent from Michael's restructuring. But it was also too late. The decision had been made not in this office, but in a conference room where she'd been dismissed as easily replaceable. David, I appreciate that more than you know. But I've already committed to this path. I've incorporated my business, secured office space, and begun the transition process. What about your non-compete agreement? Sarah had expected this question. I've reviewed the agreement carefully with legal counsel. My new practice will focus on manufacturing and industrial consulting, which falls outside the technology sector. Restrictions. Additionally, most of my current client relationships predate the current non-compete terms. David's expression grew more serious. Sarah, you realize that taking clients with you could create significant problems for both of us? I'm not taking clients anywhere, David. I'm starting an independent practice and allowing market forces to determine where clients choose to receive their consulting services. The distinction was important, both legally and ethically. Sarah wasn't stealing clients, she was creating an alternative that clients could choose if they preferred her approach to Pinnacle's new direction. Have you discussed this with Michael? Not yet. I wanted to inform you first as a matter of professional courtesy. David nodded slowly. I appreciate that. But Michael isn't going to react well to this news. He's been under pressure from the board to demonstrate the effectiveness of his restructuring initiatives. I understand that, David. But my decision isn't based on Michael's success or failure. It's based on my own career goals. They talked for another 10 minutes, covering transition logistics, client communication protocols, and non-disclosure obligations. Throughout the conversation, Sarah sensed David's growing understanding that this wasn't an impulsive decision but a carefully planned strategic move. As she prepared to leave, David asked one final question. Sarah, off the record, how many clients do you think will follow you? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah could see David calculating the potential impact, weighing the loss of revenue against the cost of trying to retain her. David, I honestly don't know. That will depend on how well Pinnacle manages the relationships I've built and whether clients are satisfied with their new service arrangements. Walking back to her office, Sarah felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The resignation was official, the timeline established. Now came the difficult part, managing the next 2 weeks while Michael processed the implications of her departure. She'd barely settled at her desk when her phone rang. Robert Hartwell's name appeared on the caller ID. Good morning, Robert. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling early, but I wanted to follow up on our conversation last week. Have you made any decisions about your consulting practice? Sarah glanced around her office, noting the client files, the awards, the photos of successful project completions that documented 5 years of dedicated work. Actually, Robert, I have news. I submitted my resignation this morning. Mitchell Strategic Consulting will be operational by December 1st. That's wonderful news, Sarah. I know it couldn't have been an easy decision, but I think you're making the right choice. When can we discuss transitioning our consulting relationship? Let me get through the next 2 weeks at Pinnacle first. I want to handle this transition professionally and ensure all my current obligations are met. Of course. But Sarah, I want you to know that Hartwell Industries is very interested in being Mitchell Strategic Consulting's first client. After hanging up, Sarah sat quietly for a moment, processing the magnitude of what she'd just set in motion. Robert's enthusiasm confirmed her market assessment, but it also meant that Michael's assumptions about easily replaceable relationships were about to be tested. Her computer chimed with an email notification. The message was from Michael, marked urgent. Sarah, I need to see you in my office immediately. Sarah looked at her watch. 9:45 Uhr morgens. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, especially when that word involved resignations from key employees. She gathered her notes, straightened her jacket, and prepared for what would likely be the most difficult conversation of her career. Michael Bradford was about to learn that his easily replaceable employee had just become his biggest competitive threat. And unlike the restructuring meeting where Sarah had been caught off guard, this time she was prepared for whatever came next. The game had officially begun. The lunch meeting with Robert Hartwell took place at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, a Chicago institution where business had been conducted over prime beef and handshake agreements for decades. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, as was her habit, and was seated at a corner table that provided privacy for sensitive conversations. Robert appeared precisely at noon, his punctuality one of the many details Sarah had documented over 3 years of working together. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it, a quality that had served him well in building Hartwell Industries from a regional manufacturer into a national player. Sarah, he said, shaking her hand with the firm grip of someone who'd spent decades closing deals. I have to say, I'm impressed by your decision to strike out on your own. It takes considerable courage. Thank you, Robert. Though I should clarify, this isn't about courage as much as it's about alignment. I want to build something that reflects my values and serves clients the way I believe they deserve to be served. Robert settled into his chair, studying the menu briefly before setting it aside. Tell me about your vision for Mitchell Strategic Consulting. Sarah had rehearsed this presentation, but sitting across from Robert, a client who'd become something close to a friend over 3 years of professional collaboration, it felt more like a conversation than a pitch. Even if it means competing directly with Pinnacle? Even then. David nodded slowly. I respect that decision, Sarah. I don't like it, but I respect it. As Sarah prepared to leave, Patricia Chen asked one final question. Sarah, what advice would you give us about managing the client relationships you're leaving behind? Sarah considered the question carefully. Focus on the relationships, not the contracts. Listen to what clients are actually saying about their needs and concerns. And don't assume that corporate efficiency is more valuable than personal attention. Walking back to her office, Sarah felt a mixture of emotions. The partner's offer had been substantial, but it had also confirmed her assessment of Pinnacle's direction. They were willing to create exceptions for her, but they weren't willing to change the fundamental approach that had led to client dissatisfaction. Her phone was ringing when she reached her desk. Robert Hartwell's name appeared on the caller. ID, Sarah, I wanted to let you know that I've officially terminated our relationship with Pinnacle. I also wanted to confirm that Hartwell Industries is committed to being Mitchell Strategic Consulting's anchor client. Robert, I appreciate your confidence more than you know. But I have to ask, are you certain this is the right decision for Hartwell Industries? Sarah, I've been in business for 30 years. I've learned to recognize when a partnership is working and when it isn't. My relationship with you has been one of the most successful consulting relationships I've ever had. My relationship with Pinnacle's new management structure was becoming increasingly problematic. What made the difference? The restrictions on communication were the final straw. When a consulting firm tells me I can't speak directly to the person managing my account, they're essentially telling me that their internal politics are more important than my business needs. That's not acceptable. After hanging up, Sarah sat quietly in her office, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Robert Hartwell's decision to terminate Pinnacle's contract wasn't just about service preferences, it was a direct challenge to Michael's restructuring strategy and a validation of everything Sarah had argued about the importance of personal relationships in consulting. The decision had been made. Now came the consequences, for Pinnacle, for Michael, and for Sarah herself. The easily replaceable employee had just become the catalyst for losing the company's most prestigious client. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight Sarah had calls to make and a business to launch. Mitchell Strategic Consulting had its first official client, and Sarah Mitchell was about to discover what it meant to compete with her former employer. The emergency partners meeting convened at 7 a.m. Friday morning, 24 hours after Robert Hartwell's contract termination. Sarah learned about it from Jennifer, who'd overheard Amanda Harrison making urgent calls to arrange the session. The meeting's agenda was straightforward: assess the damage from Sarah's departure and determine how to prevent further client defections. Sarah arrived at her office to find a terse email from David Wells. Please prepare a comprehensive transition document for all your client accounts. Include detailed contact information, project status, and any sensitive client communications. Deadline, 5 p.m. today. The request was reasonable but pointed. Pinnacle was moving quickly to secure information that might help them retain Sarah's remaining clients. As Sarah began compiling the transition documents, she reflected on the irony of her situation. 2 weeks ago, she'd been dismissed as easily replaceable. Now, Pinnacle was scrambling to document and preserve everything she'd built over 5 years, suggesting that her value had been substantially underestimated. Her phone rang at 9:30 a.m. Michael's extension. Sarah, I need to see you immediately. She found Michael in his office, but he wasn't alone. A woman in a dark suit was seated across from his desk, a legal pad and digital recorder visible on the table between them. Sarah, this is Margaret Foster from our legal department. She has some questions about your interactions with clients during your notice period. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. This wasn't a transition meeting, it was an interrogation designed to build a case for breach of contract or violation of non-compete terms. Mr. Bradford has raised concerns about your communications with Pinnacle clients, Margaret Foster began, her tone professionally neutral. We need to establish a clear timeline of your interactions with Robert Hartwell and other clients. Sarah had prepared for this possibility. I'm happy to cooperate, but I'd like to understand the specific nature of your concerns. We need to determine whether you solicited Pinnacle clients for your new business while still employed by the company. I've been careful to operate within all legal and ethical boundaries. I haven't violated any terms of my employment agreement. Margaret Foster consulted her notes. Mr. Bradford indicates that you met with Robert Hartwell on Tuesday to discuss your new consulting business. Is that accurate? I had lunch with Mr. Hartwell to discuss ongoing projects and future consulting needs. He asked questions about my resignation, and I answered them truthfully. Did you encourage him to terminate his contract with Pinnacle? I did not. Mr. Hartwell made his own business decisions based on his assessment of service quality and his preferences for consulting relationships. The questioning continued for another 30 minutes, covering every client interaction Sarah had had since submitting her resignation. Margaret Foster was thorough but professional, clearly trying to establish whether Sarah had actively solicited clients or simply responded to their inquiries. Finally, Michael interjected with barely controlled frustration. Sarah, let's stop playing games. You systematically undermined client relationships to benefit your own business. You violated your loyalty obligations to Pinnacle. Sarah looked directly at Michael, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Michael, I fulfilled my professional obligations to both Pinnacle and its clients. If clients chose to work with Mitchell Strategic Consulting, that's because they prefer the service approach I offer. The service approach you developed while employed by Pinnacle, using Pinnacle resources, working with Pinnacle clients. The service approach I developed through 5 years of 18-hour days, weekend client calls, and personal commitment to excellence. An approach you dismissed as easily replaceable. The room fell silent. Margaret Foster looked between Sarah and Michael, clearly recognizing the personal animosity underlying the professional dispute. Mr. Bradford, Margaret Foster said carefully, I need to review the documentation before making any recommendations about legal action. Ms. Mitchell, please ensure that all client files and proprietary information are returned to Pinnacle before your departure. Clients expressed frustration with communication restrictions, concern about service continuity, and growing doubts about Pinnacle's direction. Sarah handled each conversation with careful professionalism, but the cumulative effect was exactly what she'd anticipated. By 5 o'clock, Sarah had received calls from 4 different clients, 2 requests for meetings to discuss transition concerns, and 1 formal complaint about Pinnacle's communication policies. Michael's attempt to protect client relationships had instead highlighted every weakness in his management approach. As she prepared to leave the office, Sarah reflected on the day's events. Michael had tried to sabotage her client relationships by restricting communication, but his tactics had backfired by demonstrating the very bureaucratic inflexibility that clients found frustrating about Pinnacle's new direction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight Sarah had a proposal to finish, one that would offer clients exactly the kind of personalized, professional service that Michael's restrictions had made impossible at Pinnacle. The sabotage attempt had failed. In fact, it had accelerated the very outcome Michael had tried to prevent. Sarah's easily replaceable client relationships were proving to be anything but replaceable, and Michael's attempts to control the situation were only making that reality more obvious to everyone involved. The call came at 8:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, 2 days after Michael's failed attempt to restrict Sarah's client communications. She was reviewing the final draft of her proposal for Hartwell Industries when her phone displayed David Wells' extension. Sarah, I need you in my office immediately. We have a situation. The urgency in David's voice was unmistakable. Sarah gathered her files and made her way to the 40th floor, noting the unusual activity in the executive suite. Amanda Harrison was at her desk outside Michael's office, but Michael's door was closed and she looked uncharacteristically tense. David's office felt different this morning, the atmosphere charged with the kind of tension that preceded major corporate decisions. David was seated behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. 2 other senior partners, James Morrison and Patricia Chen, were present, their expressions grave. Sarah, please sit down. David's tone was formal, measured. We've received some troubling information that requires immediate attention. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but she maintained her composure. What kind of information? James Morrison leaned forward. We've learned that Robert Hartwell has formally terminated Pinnacle's consulting contract, effective immediately. He's also demanding full refund of all fees paid for the upcoming quarter. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, though not for the reasons the partners might expect. She felt a mix of vindication and concern, vindication that Robert had acted on his dissatisfaction with Pinnacle's direction, and concern about the implications for her remaining time at the company. I see, Sarah said carefully. Did Mr. Hartwell provide specific reasons for this decision? Patricia Chen consulted her tablet. He cited deteriorating service quality, unacceptable changes in account management, and what he called corporate bureaucracy that prioritizes internal politics over client relationships. David's expression was unreadable. Sarah, Mr. Hartwell also specifically requested that we facilitate a smooth transition of all project materials to his new consulting firm. He mentioned that he's engaged Mitchell Strategic Consulting to handle his account going forward. The room fell silent. Sarah realized this was the moment she'd been preparing for since submitting her resignation, the moment when her departure from Pinnacle became a direct competitive threat rather than just a personnel change. "I understand your concerns," Sarah said finally. "But I want to be clear about something. I didn't solicit Mr. Hartwell's business. He approached me about Mitchell Strategic Consulting after expressing dissatisfaction with recent changes at Pinnacle." "Changes that you discussed with him?" James Morrison's question carried an edge of accusation. "I discussed the fact that there would be changes in account management, yes. He asked specific questions about service continuity, and I answered them honestly." Patricia Chen set down her tablet. "Sarah, we need to understand the full scope of this situation. Are other clients considering similar moves?" The question was direct, unavoidable. Sarah could see the calculation in the partner's eyes. They were trying to assess whether Robert Hartwell's decision was isolated or part of a broader pattern. "I've had conversations with several clients about transition planning," Sarah said. "Some have expressed concerns about service continuity under new management structures." "How many clients?" David's question was quiet but pointed. "4 have requested meetings to discuss their concerns. 2 have asked for detailed information about Mitchell Strategic service offerings." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Sarah watched the partners exchange glances, recognizing the rapid calculation of revenue at risk. David stood and walked to his window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "Sarah, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. What would it take to keep you at Pinnacle?" The question surprised her. After days of restrictions and accusations, David was apparently considering negotiation rather than confrontation. "David, I appreciate the question, but I don't think that's possible anymore. Too much has changed in the relationship between Pinnacle and myself. What if we restructured your role? Gave you more autonomy, better resources, a path to partnership?" Sarah felt a moment of genuine consideration. The offer was substantial, addressing many of the concerns that had led to her resignation. But it was also too late. The damage to her relationship with Michael, the restrictions on her client communications, the casual dismissal of her value had created wounds that couldn't be healed with organizational changes. "David, the problem isn't my role or resources. The problem is a fundamental disagreement about how to serve clients and build lasting business relationships." James Morrison interjected, "What kind of disagreement?" "I believe client relationships are built on personal trust, customized service, and genuine partnership. Recent changes at Pinnacle suggest a preference for standardized processes, efficient delivery, and cost management. Those aren't necessarily wrong approaches, but they're not compatible with how I work." Patricia Chen leaned forward. "And you believe clients prefer your approach?" "I believe some clients do, yes. Clients like Robert Hartwell who value personal relationships and customized solutions over corporate efficiency." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from non-compete obligations to client transition protocols. The partners asked detailed questions about Sarah's business plan, her client development strategy, and her long-term vision for Mitchell Strategic Consulting. Finally, David returned to his desk. "Sarah, I want to make you an offer. Stay at Pinnacle for 6 months. We'll create a new position, Director of Client Relationships, with full autonomy over service delivery for your existing accounts. No interference from Michael, no standardized processes, complete freedom to manage client relationships as you see fit." The offer was generous, more than Sarah had expected. But it was also irrelevant to the decision she'd already made. "David, I'm honored by the offer, but Mitchell Strategic Consulting isn't just about my role at Pinnacle. It's about building something that reflects my values and serves clients the way I believe they deserve to be served." After the legal interview, Sarah returned to her office to find Jennifer waiting with coffee and barely concealed anger. "That was a legal interrogation," Jennifer said, closing the door behind her. "Michael's trying to build a case against you." "I know. But he's also making the same mistake he made with the communication restrictions. He's reacting emotionally instead of strategically." "What do you mean?" Sarah explained her assessment of the legal situation. Her resignation had been properly submitted, her interactions with clients had been professional, and she'd been careful to avoid any violations of her employment agreement. More importantly, Michael's attempts to restrict her communications had actually strengthened her position by demonstrating Pinnacle's bureaucratic approach to client relationships. "Jennifer, can I ask you something personal? What are your plans for the next few months?" Jennifer looked surprised by the question. "I'm going to continue working here, I suppose." "Why?" "Because I think you're going to find the environment increasingly difficult." Michael's under pressure to demonstrate that his restructuring strategy works, and losing the Hartwell account has put him in a defensive position. Are you offering me a job? Sarah smiled. I'm offering you a partnership. Mitchell Strategic Consulting needs someone with your analytical skills and client development capabilities. We could build something special together. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on Sarah's door. Amanda Harrison stood in the hallway, looking unusually nervous. Sarah, could I speak with you privately? Jennifer excused herself, leaving Sarah alone with Michael's assistant. Amanda closed the door and sat down, her professional composure cracking slightly. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Michael's been asking me to monitor your communications, track your client interactions, and report back to him about your activities. The admission was surprising but not shocking. Sarah had suspected that Michael was gathering intelligence about her departure. Have you been doing what he asked? Amanda's expression was pained. I've been giving him minimal information. But Sarah, I've also been documenting his behavior over the past 2 weeks. The restrictions on your communications, the legal interrogation, the attempts to turn other employees against you, it's all been inappropriate. Why are you telling me this? Because I've worked in corporate environments for 15 years. And I've seen how good managers handle difficult situations versus how poor managers handle them. Michael's response to your resignation has been completely unprofessional. Amanda reached into her folder and withdrew a stack of documents. These are copies of emails, meeting notes, and other documentation of Michael's behavior since you submitted your resignation. If he tries to take legal action against you, you'll need evidence of his retaliation. Sarah accepted the documents, recognizing their potential value. Amanda, this could put your job at risk. I know. But I also know that what's happening here is wrong. You've been nothing but professional throughout this process, and Michael's been treating you like a criminal. That afternoon, Sarah received a call from David Wells requesting a final meeting. When she arrived at his office, she found him alone, looking tired and frustrated. Sarah, I want to apologize for this morning's legal meeting. That wasn't how I wanted to handle your departure. David, I understand the pressures you're facing. Losing a major client is never easy. It's not just about losing Robert Hartwell, though that's certainly significant. It's about what his decision says about our company's direction and our ability to maintain the relationships that matter most. David paused, staring out his window at the Chicago skyline. Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about your disagreement with Pinnacle's approach to client relationships. I'm starting to wonder if you might be right. The admission was unexpected. Sarah had anticipated continued conflict, not reflective uncertainty. What makes you say that? Because in 30 years of business, I've learned that clients don't leave good consulting relationships for minor reasons. Robert Hartwell's decision to terminate our contract and demand a refund suggests that we've fundamentally misunderstood what he values. What are you going to do about it? David was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to recommend that the partners conduct a comprehensive review of our client relationship management practices. And I'm going to suggest that we reconsider some of the changes Michael implemented. And Michael? Michael's going to have to demonstrate that his restructuring strategy can work without the client relationships you built. That's going to be very difficult. As Sarah prepared to leave David's office, he asked one final question. Sarah, if things had been different, if we'd had this conversation 6 months ago, would you have stayed? Sarah considered the question carefully. David, I honestly don't know. But I can tell you that I never wanted to leave Pinnacle. I wanted Pinnacle to be the kind of company where my approach to client relationships was valued rather than dismissed. Walking back to her office for the final time, Sarah reflected on the day's events. Michael's attempts to build a legal case against her had revealed the depth of his desperation, while Amanda's documentation had provided protection against potential retaliation. Most importantly, David's questioning of Pinnacle's direction suggested that the company might eventually recognize the value of what they'd lost. But that recognition would come too late for Sarah Mitchell. By Monday morning, she would be the CEO of Mitchell Strategic Consulting, and Pinnacle Strategic Solutions would be learning what it meant to compete with the employee they dismissed as easily replaceable. The reckoning was complete. Now came the real test, building something better than what she'd left behind. 6 months after her departure from Pinnacle Strategic Solutions, Sarah Mitchell stood at the podium of the Chicago Industrial Consulting Conference, looking out at an audience of 300 business leaders, consultants, and industry experts. The conference invitation had arrived just 2 weeks earlier, a recognition of Mitchell Strategic Consulting's rapid emergence as a significant player in the regional consulting market. The consulting industry has undergone dramatic changes. In recent years, Sarah began her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd not only survived those changes but thrived because of them. We've seen increased emphasis on efficiency, standardization, and cost reduction. These aren't inherently negative developments, but they've sometimes come at the expense of what I believe is the most valuable asset in consulting: authentic client relationships. From her position at the podium, Sarah could see familiar faces in the audience. Robert Hartwell sat in the third row, his presence a testament to the success of their ongoing partnership. Jennifer Thompson, now Sarah's business partner and co-founder of Mitchell Strategic, was seated near the back, taking notes for their post-conference analysis. More surprisingly, David Wells was present, seated near the middle of the audience. Their eyes met briefly, and he nodded with what appeared to be professional respect. Notably absent was Michael Bradford, who had left Pinnacle 3 months earlier under circumstances that remained officially undisclosed but were widely understood to involve the client relationship failures that had followed Sarah's departure. 6 months ago, I made a decision that changed my life, Sarah continued. I left a prestigious consulting firm to start my own practice, built around 3 simple principles: genuine partnership, customized solutions, and personal accountability. Today, I want to share what I've learned about the true value of business relationships. The presentation that followed was a case study in strategic thinking and execution. Sarah described Mitchell Strategic's approach to client service, their methodology for building lasting partnerships, and the measurable results they'd achieved. She spoke about client retention rates that exceeded industry standards by 40%, satisfaction scores that averaged 9.2 out of 10, and revenue growth that had attracted attention from potential investors. What she didn't mention was the personal cost of that success: the 18-hour days spent building systems and processes, the financial uncertainty of the early months, the emotional weight of competing with former colleagues and friends. The audience heard about triumph. They didn't hear about the sleepless nights or the moments of doubt that had tested her resolve. After the presentation, Sarah was approached by a steady stream of attendees, potential clients, competitors, and industry colleagues interested in understanding her approach. The conversations were professionally satisfying, but it was the private meeting afterward that carried the most significance. David Wells found her in the conference center's quiet lounge area, where she was reviewing her notes and preparing for the drive back to Mitchell Strategic's offices. Sarah, that was an impressive presentation. You've built something remarkable. Thank you, David. I appreciate you taking the time to attend. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the strangeness of the situation. 6 months earlier, they'd been employer and employee, navigating a difficult departure. Now they were competitors, but with a mutual respect that transcended their business relationship. Sarah, I want to tell you something that I should have said months ago. You were right about client relationships. The changes Michael implemented, the standardization processes, the efficiency measures, they worked on paper, but they failed in practice. What happened? David's expression was thoughtful, tinged with regret. We lost 3 more significant clients in the months after your departure. Each one cited the same concerns Robert Hartwell had raised: bureaucracy over personal attention, standardized solutions over customized service, corporate efficiency over genuine partnership. And Michael? Michael was a talented individual. Contributor who wasn't ready for the complexities of leadership. He understood strategic thinking, but he never understood people. His approach worked in environments where relationships were transactional, but it failed completely when dealing with clients who valued personal connection. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of vindication and sadness. She'd taken no pleasure in Pinnacle's struggles, recognizing that the company's difficulties affected not just Michael but also good people like Jennifer who had remained there, and clients who deserved better service. David, what are your plans for rebuilding? We're implementing changes based on what we learned from our mistakes. More emphasis on relationship management, more flexibility in service delivery, more autonomy for client-facing staff. In many ways, we're moving toward the approach you advocated. And the clients you lost? David smiled ruefully. Some of them are working with Mitchell Strategic now. I can't say I'm happy about that from a competitive standpoint, but I am glad they're receiving the quality of service they deserve. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering industry trends, market opportunities, and the evolving nature of consulting relationships. It was a professional discussion between equals, marked by mutual respect and shared understanding of the challenges facing their industry. As they prepared to part ways, David made an unexpected offer. Sarah, I know this might sound strange, given our history, but I'd like to explore the possibility of a strategic partnership between Pinnacle and Mitchell Strategic. Not a merger or acquisition, but a collaboration that could benefit both our clients and our companies. Sarah considered the proposal carefully. 6 months earlier, she would have been skeptical of any partnership with Pinnacle. But David's acknowledgement of past mistakes and his apparent commitment to change suggested possibilities she hadn't considered. David, I'm open to exploring that conversation. But any partnership would need to be built on mutual respect for different approaches to client service. I wouldn't expect anything else. That evening, Sarah returned to Mitchell Strategic's offices in a converted warehouse space in Chicago's River North District. The building was less prestigious than Pinnacle's downtown tower, but it reflected the company's values: functional, efficient, focused on substance over style. Jennifer was waiting in their shared office space, having returned from her own conference activities. Their partnership had evolved beyond professional collaboration into genuine friendship, built on shared commitment to excellence and mutual respect for each other's strengths. How did the David Wells conversation go? Jennifer asked, settling into her chair with a cup of coffee. Better than I expected. He's acknowledged that Pinnacle's approach to client relationships was flawed, and he's apparently implementing changes based on what they learned from their mistakes. Including the strategic partnership idea? Especially that. I think he recognizes that competition isn't always zero-sum. Sometimes collaboration creates more value for everyone involved. They spent the next hour reviewing the day's events, planning follow-up activities with potential clients, and discussing the strategic decisions that would shape Mitchell Strategic's future growth. The conversation was punctuated by phone calls from existing clients, emails from potential new partnerships, and the ongoing operational details that define successful consulting practices. At 9 p.m., Sarah finally prepared to leave the office. As she gathered her files and prepared for the drive home, she paused to look around the space she and Jennifer had created. The office walls were covered with client testimonials, project success stories, and photos from company celebrations. It was a visual representation of everything they'd built together, a consulting practice that measured success not just in revenue and profit, but in client satisfaction and employee fulfillment. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her father, saw the conference coverage online. Proud of you, sweetheart. You've built something special. Sarah smiled, remembering the late-night phone call 6 months earlier when she'd questioned her own value and wondered if Michael's dismissive assessment might be accurate. Thomas Mitchell's wisdom had provided the foundation for everything that followed, the recognition that authentic relationships couldn't be replicated or replaced, only built through consistent demonstration of competence and care. The drive home to Lincoln Park took her past Pinnacle's downtown offices, now illuminated against the night sky. Sarah felt no animosity toward her former employer, only a sense of satisfaction that she'd proven the fundamental assumptions underlying her career. Client relationships weren't easily replaceable because they weren't built on corporate structures or standardized processes. They were built on trust, earned through consistent delivery of value, maintained through genuine care for client success. Michael Bradford had been wrong about her replaceability, but his error had created an opportunity that might not have existed otherwise. Sometimes the most valuable gift is the recognition that you're capable of more than you'd previously imagined. As Sarah pulled into her apartment's parking garage, she reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the past 6 months. She'd evolved from a dismissed employee to a successful entrepreneur, from someone who questioned her own value to someone who had built a thriving business based on that value. The easiest person to replace, it turned out, was the manager who believed that people were replaceable. The hardest person to replace was the one who understood that lasting success comes from building relationships, not just managing them. Sarah Mitchell had learned that lesson the hard way. Now she was teaching it to others, one client relationship at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.